Every morning, I wake up with the same ritual. I make tea, place it on the small table beside my chair, and sit down, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for one of my children to call. Sometimes I pretend that the ring is imminent. Sometimes I imagine their voices before they even speak. I hear my daughter's laughter, my son's teasing, my eldest child's soft "good morning, mama," but then, nothing. Silence.it is not that I do not try to reach out. I do. I call them. I send messages. I even leave voicemails. But responses are brief, delayed, or sometimes non-existent. And each time I hang up, a quiet ache settles in my chest, reminder that the children I raised, the ones I spent decades nurturing, are now too busy, too distracted, or too distant to remember the woman who gave them everything. I do not shout. I do not beg. I simply sit there, hands wrapped around the warm cup, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock, and the soft whispers of memories in the house. I am 67 years old. My name is Ruqayya. I spent my life ensuring my children were cared for, loved, and guided. I cooked their meals, cleaned their clothes, nursed them through illness, and celebrated every achievement. I sacrificed without thinking, gave without asking, and trusted that the love I invested would eventually come back to me in some measure. But life has a way of teaching lessons that are harsh and relentless. I had 3 children, 2 daughters, Amina and Samina, and 1 son, Farhan. When they were young, our home was filled with laughter, quarrels over small things, and a sense of belonging. I remember Amina's first day at school, her tiny hand gripping mine so tightly I feared she would leave a mark. Samina would cling to her dolls, whispering secrets into their ears as she waved goodbye to me. Farhan, the youngest, always curious and mischievous, would run ahead to explore the world. I was there for every step of their journey. I guided them through their first falls, wiped their tears, and celebrated their smallest victories. When they were sick, I stayed awake all night, holding their hands, praying for their health, whispering assurances that everything would be okay. I worked tirelessly, often without thanks. I believe that love is not measured in words, but in actions. That the warmth of a home, the security of family, and the certainty of care were enough. As the years passed, my children grew. They went to school, then to college, and eventually, into careers and marriages. I supported them through every milestone. I attended graduations, weddings, birthdays, and every small ceremony in between. My hands became worn from cooking, my eyes strained from late nights helping with homework, my body tired from endless chores. But my heart remained full. Then, slowly, things changed. It began with small absences, a phone call missed, a brief reply to a message, a canceled visit. I tried to understand work, life, responsibilities. I reminded myself that children grow, and distance is natural. But gradually, the absences grew longer, the messages became rarer, and the visits almost disappeared. Holidays passed without invitations. Birthdays were acknowledged in fleeting texts. I began to feel like a stranger in the lives of those I had nurtured. The first time I cried over the phone, it was after Samina didn't answer my call for a week. I had needed to speak to her about a small health concern. I had imagined her voice, her laughter, her reassurances, but the call went unanswered. And in that silence, I felt the crushing weight of invisibility. I remember sitting on my bed, phone in hand, tears slipping quietly down my cheeks. For the first time, I felt that the love I had given might not be enough. Now, every day is the same. I wake early, make tea, and sit by the phone. I imagine it ringing at any moment. Each vibration, each tone, ignites a flicker of hope. Maybe today. I tell myself. I check the clock, look at the calendar, and then at the photo frames around the room. Pictures of my children when they were little. Pictures of them in school uniforms, at birthday parties, at weddings. Pictures of us together, smiling, holding hands. A family. And then slowly, the ache returns. Sometimes, I hear laughter outside the window and imagine them walking past, living their lives so far away from mine. Sometimes I hear the mail arrive and hope for a letter, a card, a message. But the mailbox is empty. I wait. And I wait. At night, I replay my life in quiet moments. I remember the sacrifices I made, how I skipped meals so my children could eat, how I worked extra hours to send them to good schools, how I stayed awake through storms and illness to ensure they were safe. I remember the times I put their needs before mine. The times I silenced my own dreams to build theirs. And I wonder, not angrily, but with a deep sorrow, did they ever notice? Did they ever realize how much of myself I poured into them? Sometimes I feel a pang of regret not for giving, but for expecting love in return. I believed that my devotion would naturally circle back to me. I believed that the children I raised with care and attention would not leave me in silence. But I was wrong. Being forgotten by your children is a quiet kind of pain. There is no loud argument, no dramatic confrontation. There is only absence, neglect, and the gnawing certainty that the people you devoted your life to are now too busy, too distant, or too indifferent to include you in theirs. I wait for calls that may never come. I hope for visits that might never happen. And each day, the silence stretches longer, the ache grows heavier, and my heart tightens a little more. Yet, I do not give up, because hope, no matter how fragile, is all I have left. I hope for one message, one phone call, one small reminder that I am remembered, that I am loved, that I am still part of their lives. I wait by the phone every day, my heart holding both love and sorrow. And in that waiting, I find a strange kind of strength, a reminder that even when others forget, I can still honor the love I gave. The days blurred together in a routine of quiet waiting. Each morning I made tea, each afternoon I tidied the house, and each evening I sat by the phone, staring at its blank screen. The ring never came. Not from Amina, not from Samina, not even from Farhan. At first, I told myself they were busy. I reminded myself of their careers, their families, their responsibilities. They had lives to live, and maybe I was just a small, distant part of it now. But life has a way of forcing reality upon you, slowly at first. Then, all at once, the first sign that I was being forgotten came when Farhan didn't show up for dinner on his birthday. I had cooked his favorite dishes, biryani, samosas, and kheer for dessert. I set the table, lit a small candle, and waited for him to walk through the door. Hours passed. No knock, no message. I called him that night. "Happy birthday, Beta," I whispered when he answered. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, thanks, Mama," he said finally. His voice was rushed, distant. "I'm busy with work. Maybe later we can celebrate." "Later?" I asked softly. "But it's your birthday." "Yes, Mama." "Later," he repeated, and the line went dead. I sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't cry that night. I only held the phone, staring at it, wondering when they stopped needing me the way I had always needed them. Then came small, subtle moments. Amina started leaving the house without saying goodbye. Samina, who used to call every morning to ask about my health, stopped calling. Farhan avoided long conversations, always ending calls abruptly with work excuses. I began noticing the unspoken rule. I was no longer part of their immediate world. I was a quiet presence at the edges, welcome only when convenient. One day, I baked a cake for Samina's wedding anniversary. I remembered every detail she liked: chocolate with a hint of coffee, a layer of whipped cream, and fresh strawberries on top. I called to tell her I had baked it and that I wanted to drop it off. "Oh, thanks, Mama," she said, her voice polite but distant. "Actually, we're busy tonight with friends. Maybe another day?" I paused. My hands were trembling slightly. "Another day?" I repeated softly. "Yes," she said, not realizing, or maybe not caring, that my heart ached with every word. "Another day." I hung up and placed the cake back in its box. I ate a small slice myself, pretending it was meant for me. But each bite tasted like the distance growing between us. Another incident happened when Farhan visited for a brief weekend. I had prepared everything meticulously, hoping for a chance to reconnect. I cooked his favorite meal, cleaned the house, and even ironed his clothes. He arrived, barely noticing the effort. He greeted me with a hug that lasted only a second and then disappeared into his phone. He barely touched the food, scrolling through messages while I tried to make conversation. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him how lonely I felt. But I stayed silent, forcing a smile, pretending that everything was fine. When he left, he barely looked back. I cried quietly that night. Not loudly, not in anger, just silently, tears sliding down my cheeks as I realized that the children I loved had grown distant. Not because they hated me, but because they had moved on, leaving me behind in ways too subtle to confront directly. The worst of it was the phone. Every vibration made my heart jump. Every unfamiliar number filled me with hope, only to remind me that it wasn't them. Even a text notification became both a promise and a betrayal. Sometimes I would call their numbers repeatedly, hoping someone would answer. Sometimes I would leave long voicemails, explaining small things about my day, about memories we shared, about how much I miss them. Most of the time, I received no reply, and when I did, it was brief. A word, a sentence, a curt acknowledgement of my existence. One morning, I sat by the window, looking at the birds outside. They flitted freely, coming and going as they pleased. I envied their liberty. I envied their ability to be heard in the world, to leave an imprint that others noticed. I whispered to myself, have I become invisible? Perhaps that's the cruelest part. Being left behind is not always loud or dramatic. It is quiet, insidious, and slow. It is the absence of calls, the missing visits, the forgotten dates, the unspoken words. As weeks turned into months, I noticed changes in myself. I no longer called as often, not because I didn't want to, but because every unanswered call hurt more than the last. I stopped baking for them, stopped preparing little gifts, stopped leaving notes. I felt smaller, less important, less needed. I began shrinking into the corners of my life, focusing only on what I could control: my home, my routines, my memories. I would sit by the phone, yes, but I no longer expected it to ring, and yet, hope clung stubbornly to me. A single spark that refused to die. One day, Farhan visited with his family. I had cleaned the house, cooked his favorite meals, and even bought a small gift for his children. I waited, expecting warmth, laughter, and connection. Instead, I received politeness, distant smiles, quick conversations. I watched them interact with my grandchildren, offering guidance, affection, and attention without me. I was an observer in my own home, a shadow in the life I had built. The children I had raised, the ones I had nursed through sickness, celebrated through victories, and protected from the world, were thriving. But without me, I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I only smiled politely, serving the tea, clearing the plates, and silently feeling my heart fracture with every passing moment. That evening, as I washed the dishes, I realized that my role in their lives had been quietly reduced to a caretaker of memories, a living museum of their childhood, welcome only in moments of convenience. That night, I sat by the phone longer than usual. I dialed Amina's number, then Samina's, then Farhan's. Each time, I listened to the ring with anticipation, imagining their voices on the other end. No one answered. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache spread through my chest like a slow, relentless tide. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I realized then that the waiting was the worst part. Not the absence, not the neglect, but the waiting. The hope that they might remember, the hope that they might call, the hope that they might still care. And yet, I couldn't stop, because love doesn't leave you just because it's unreturned. And because hope, even the faintest flicker, refuses to die completely. The days of quiet heartbreak had already begun to erode me, but I never realized how sharp the pain could be until the day I truly felt invisible. It was a rainy afternoon. The sky was gray, the streets glistened with water, and the soft hum of rain against my window was the only companion in my empty house. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window, where I could watch life continue outside, while my own felt suspended. The phone sat beside me, still silent, still refusing to bring the voices I longed for. I had called Farhan in the morning, just to hear him say, "Hello, Mama," but there was no answer. I left a voicemail, trying to sound calm, trying not to let my despair seep through. By afternoon, I had already checked the phone 10 times, imagining that each vibration might be them. Each time it wasn't. The weight in my chest grew heavier. The doorbell rang that afternoon. I hesitated before answering. Visitors were rare. Most often, I imagined it was someone delivering a package or asking directions. It was Amina, my eldest daughter. She had come without notice. At first, I felt relief, a familiar face, someone I had always loved. But the warmth I expected was missing. She smiled politely, not with the embrace I had imagined, but with a careful distance, like someone approaching a delicate vase they didn't want to break. "Hello, Mama," she said. "Beta. Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked past me, her eyes scanning the room. My home, once filled with laughter and family, felt tense under her gaze. She settled on the sofa without a word, and I poured her tea, trying to fill the silence with something familiar. We spoke of small things, weather, the neighborhood, a mutual friend. But the conversation felt hollow. I realized with a sinking heart that I was now merely a guest in my own home. Finally, after what felt like hours, she looked at me and said softly, "Mama, I wanted to talk to you about something important." My stomach twisted. I had a feeling I knew what was coming. "I know you wait by the phone," she continued, "and I know you call often." I nodded slowly, unsure what she wanted to say next. "Farhan, Samina, and we've been discussing something." Her voice faltered. "We think it might be better if you stay with someone else for a while. Maybe with Aunt Noor or an old friend. It would make things easier for everyone." The words fell on me like bricks. I froze. The tea I held trembled in my hands. "Stay? Somewhere else?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Yes, Mama, just for a while," she said gently, as if her words were a gift and not a knife. "You know we love you. It's just for Ayan's routine, for Farhan's life, for everything." I set the tea down on the table. My hands shook. My chest tightened. My entire body felt the weight of abandonment in a single, suffocating moment. "You want me to leave my home?" I asked, my voice breaking. "It's just temporary, Mama," she said. "We'll come visit. We'll call." I felt the edges of my heart cracking, pieces falling silently to the floor. Temporary or not, the message was clear. My presence was no longer essential. My love no longer needed in the daily rhythm of their lives. Amina left after less than an hour. I didn't call out to her. I didn't argue. I simply closed the door and leaned against it. The rain outside mixing with the tears on my cheeks. I realized something profound in that moment. Love, no matter how much you give, is sometimes not enough to secure a place in someone else's life. Years of care, of waking up before dawn, of nursing fevers, of celebrating birthdays, of comforting heartbreaks, they were all quietly replaced by schedules, routines, and polite distance. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked streets. Children ran through puddles, couples held umbrellas, strangers hurried past. Life continued outside, and inside, I felt frozen in a moment where I no longer mattered. That evening, the phone rang. My heart leapt. My hands shook. I answered immediately, only to hear a recorded message. "We're sorry. The number you have dialed is not available at this time." I sank into my chair, sobbing quietly. The phone that had been my lifeline, my source of hope, now mocked me with its silence. I realized then that my waiting was no longer passive. It was active suffering. Every day, I sat by the phone, hoping for love that had already drifted away. Every unanswered ring was a small reminder that I had been forgotten. Over the next few days, I felt my world shrinking. I stopped preparing food for anyone. I stopped cleaning the house with care. I stopped maintaining my appearance. Each action felt futile, like caring for a place where I was no longer welcome. I spent hours in my room, surrounded by photographs of my children as babies, their school achievements, family vacations. I held these images close, whispering to them, hoping that my words would reach through the distance. "I am still here. I still love you. I am still waiting." But the silence answered back. A week later, Farhan and his family visited. I had hoped that a face-to-face meeting might bridge the growing gap. I cooked his favorite dishes, laid out the table, even bought small gifts for his children. When they arrived, everything went as usual. Polite greetings, hurried conversation, laughter that felt forced. Farhan barely glanced at me. Samina didn't ask how I was. The children, oblivious to the tension, ran around the house, laughing and playing. It was then that I realized the cruel truth. My children and grandchildren had moved on. Their lives continued, filled with joy and routine, while I remained a shadow, a figure fading in the background. The final blow came when Farhan's eldest son looked at me and said innocently, "Grandma, when are you leaving? Mama says we have to focus on our schedule." I felt my heart shatter into pieces too small to recover. My love, my care, my presence, it had all become inconvenient. That night, I sat by the window again. The rain had stopped, leaving a cold silence in its wake. I stared at the phone. It would ring. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe never. I whispered to myself, "I am here. I am still here." But I knew something had changed. Something irreversible. The children I had nurtured, the grandchildren I had adored, They no longer needed me in the way I had always imagined. The turning point was complete. The realization had settled in. Life had moved forward without me. And the place I had always called home had quietly shifted beneath my feet. The heartache was immense, but in its rawness, I found a strange clarity. I would continue to wait, continue to hope, continue to love. But I would also prepare myself for the reality that love alone does not always guarantee presence. The days after that final, crushing visit passed slowly. The house felt different, emptier, colder. Even the walls seemed to remember the laughter and love that had once filled them, now replaced by a quiet I could hardly bear. I stopped trying to fill the silence with activity. The kitchen remained quiet, the floors unpolished, the rooms untouched. I used to find purpose in the rhythms of the home, feeding my children, caring for the grandchildren, tidying the corners, making the house a haven. But now, every action felt hollow. The phone sat beside me, silent as always. I waited for Farhan, Samina, or even one of the children to call. I waited for the familiar voice of my eldest daughter. I waited for someone to ask, "Mama, how are you?" But the phone remained still. Each morning, I woke with the same ritual. I washed my face, made tea, and sat by the window, looking at the street. I watched the neighbors go about their lives, children laughing, parents hurrying off to work. And then I sat by the phone, willing it to ring. Sometimes I whispered to myself, maybe today someone will call. And every day, the silence reminded me that the life I had poured into my family was now, in a sense, poured into emptiness. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had run dry long ago. What remained was a quiet ache, a steady awareness that I had become invisible to the people I had loved the most. I thought often about the years I had given, the sleepless nights, the meals prepared, the clothes stitched, the fevers nursed, the stories read. Every sacrifice, every effort, every bit of love I poured into my children and grandchildren had been my life's purpose. And yet, here I was forgotten, overlooked, left behind. It was a painful revelation, but it also brought clarity. I realized that love, though profound and pure, cannot force others to value it. I could not demand gratitude, nor could I insist on presence. Love is offered freely, and sometimes it is returned, but sometimes it isn't. I began writing in my journal again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote letters to my children that I never sent, pouring my heart onto the pages. I have always loved you. I have always been here. I am proud of the people you have become. I hope you know that my love is endless, even if you cannot see it. Writing became a small solace. It was a way to let my feelings exist without needing acknowledgement. It was a private form of love, unmeasured and undemanded. One morning, while sitting by the window, I noticed a neighbor's little girl fall and scrape her knee. I rushed out instinctively, tending to her like I used to care for my own children. She smiled at me, hugging my hand, and I felt a spark of the old warmth return. It was then that I realized my capacity to care and love was not lost. It had simply outgrown the family that no longer made space for me. I could still offer kindness, still nurture, still connect. From that moment, I began seeking small interactions outside my children's world. I greeted neighbors, offered help when I could, shared stories with friends who still called. Slowly, I began to feel the faint return of purpose. But even with these small joys, loneliness remained. There were nights when I would sit in the dark, staring at the phone, and wish for the voices that had drifted away. I ached to hear Farhan laugh, to hear Samina's gentle reminders, to hear my grandchildren's chatter. The ache was not bitterness, it was grief. Grief for the life I had built, for the family I had nurtured, for the love that was now distant. And yet, I began to accept that grief, as heavy as it was also proof that I had truly loved. Gradually, I made a quiet decision. I would live for myself as much as I had lived for others. I would find small joys, tend to my own needs, and embrace the beauty that still existed in the world around me. I took walks in the park, admiring the changing seasons. I began reading books that had long sat on my shelf untouched. I visited old friends and cousins, reconnecting with people who reminded me that love and companionship still existed outside my immediate family. I even began cooking for myself, experimenting with new recipes, and savoring the meals without worry about anyone else's opinion. It was liberating and sorrowful at the same time, a bittersweet reminder that independence had a cost, but also a reward. Of course, the phone rarely rang. I had to accept that. Each time it vibrated, I jumped with hope, only to be disappointed by a wrong number or a telemarketer. But over time, the phone became less a symbol of my waiting and more a companion of quiet reflection. It reminded me that hope could exist without fulfillment, that I could hope, even if the world didn't answer. One evening, as I sat by the window sipping tea, I thought about my children and grandchildren. I didn't hate them. I didn't blame them. Life had simply carried them along paths I was no longer a part of, and in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. I could continue to love them from afar, silently, without expectation. I could remember them as they were when they were small, holding on to memories that no one could take away. I whispered softly to the night, I will always love you. Even if you do not call, even if you forget, my love will remain. The days continued. Slowly, I learned to find beauty in small moments. The chirping of birds outside, the warmth of sunlight through the window, the laughter of neighborhood children, the simple pleasure of reading a good book. I began volunteering at the local community center, helping older women with errands, sharing stories with children, and offering a listening ear. I realized that love, even when ignored by those closest to us, could still bloom elsewhere. Though the ache for my children's presence remained, it was no longer paralyzing. It had become a quiet, manageable longing. I could live alongside it, carry it gently without letting it consume me. I had waited by the phone every day, hoping for a call. But now, I also waited for moments of life that belonged solely to me, and in that waiting, I discovered strength, resilience, and a new kind of peace. Time, as it always does, continued its quiet march. The days flowed into weeks, and the weeks into months. I had learned to live with the absence of the calls I longed for, the voices I missed, and the warmth I had once taken for granted. The phone still sat by my side, silent most of the time. But it no longer held the power to make or break my day. It had become a companion of hope, not despair. Even in its quiet, it reminded me that life carries on, whether we hear from our children or not. I began to structure my days in ways that nourish me. Mornings were my own tea, a small walk, a few minutes of quiet reflection by the window. I wrote letters to myself, recounting memories, thoughts, and dreams I had shelved for decades. I began reading novels, exploring stories I had never had time for when I was caring for others. I also rediscovered hobbies long forgotten. Gardening, which had once been a small joy, became a daily ritual. I planted flowers and herbs, watching them grow, nurture, and flourish. Caring for them reminded me that life, even when it seems lonely, has beauty and growth. I joined a local women's circle, where I found camaraderie among other grandmothers and elderly women. We shared stories, baked together, and sometimes simply sat in quiet company. Their experiences mirrored mine, love given freely, and in many cases, gratitude delayed or absent. But together, we found a sense of belonging that transcended family ties. Many evenings, I would sit by the phone and imagine what it would feel like if one of my children called. The fantasy comforted me, even as reality continued its silence. But over time, I realized that peace did not come from waiting for them to reach out. It came from embracing the moments I had, from cherishing the life I still lived, and from recognizing the love that had been within me all along. I had given everything I could give, without expectation. And though the world had not always returned it in equal measure, that did not diminish the purity of my love. I began to collect memories in my mind like precious jewels. I recalled the first time I held each child in my arms, the laughter we shared, the bedtime stories, the festivals celebrated, the tears wiped away. Even if they no longer sought my presence, those memories remained untouched by time or neglect. Every photograph I had carefully preserved. Every letter, every keepsake, every small memento, these became my treasure chest. And in them, I found the evidence of a life well lived. A heart well loved, even if it was no longer fully recognized by those I adored. One of the hardest lessons I learned was the ability to love without expectation. I had spent decades giving everything to my children, believing love would secure a place in their hearts. But life is not always fair. People grow, change, and sometimes drift away, not out of malice, but circumstance, pride, or self-interest. Accepting this truth did not diminish my love. Instead, it allowed me to release the weight of disappointment that had pressed upon my chest for so many years. I learned that loving without expectation is freedom. It is giving without chains. And in this, I discovered a quiet dignity I had never known before. With the space left by my children's absence, I found opportunities to help others in my community. I visited neighbors, assisted the elderly, and shared my stories with younger generations. I began tutoring neighborhood children, helping them with homework, and sometimes simply listening to their dreams and fears. Every small act of kindness reminded me that love is never wasted. Even if it isn't returned by those closest to us, it finds its way elsewhere, rippling quietly through lives we may never fully know. Living alone brought its own challenges, but also its gifts. Solitude taught me to rely on myself, to find contentment in my own company, and to cultivate inner peace. I discovered that silence can be a companion, not a burden. That the heart, even when it aches, has an extraordinary capacity to heal, adapt, and grow. That the absence of one form of love can open doors to unexpected forms of joy. I began to cherish the ordinary moments, brewing my morning tea, tending to the garden, feeling the sun on my face, hearing the wind rustle the leaves. Life's beauty was subtle, but it existed, patiently waiting for me to notice. One afternoon, months later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was an old friend, someone who had known me long before my children grew up. She brought a small basket of fruits and baked goods. We sat together, sharing memories and laughter, and for the first time in many months, I felt fully seen and appreciated. It reminded me that family isn't only blood. Friendship, kindness, and shared experiences can be just as powerful in nourishing the soul. I often reflected on the paradox of love and loss. I had given my life to my children, yet they had drifted. I had poured warmth into their lives, yet some of that warmth had faded from mine, and yet I did not regret it. Every moment spent nurturing, caring, and loving had been a gift. I had lived fully, and in that, there was no failure. I had learned that love is not measured by return. Its value lies in the giving, in the devotion, in the commitment to care, regardless of recognition. Over time, I reached a quiet acceptance. I understood that my children's distance was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their own lives, choices, and struggles. I no longer waited by the phone with desperate hope. I could wait calmly, peacefully, knowing that if they called, I would answer with love, but if they didn't, my heart would still be full. I could exist without their acknowledgement and still find meaning, beauty, and joy. I continued to live with dignity, cherishing memories, embracing solitude, and spreading kindness wherever I could. I was no longer just a mother or grandmother seeking validation. I was Salma, a woman with a lifetime of love, wisdom, and resilience. I visited old friends, taught children, tended to my garden, wrote letters, and reflected quietly on my journey. Each day became a testament to the power of survival, the endurance of love, and the strength of the human spirit. To anyone who has ever felt abandoned by those they love, know that your love is not wasted. Know that your kindness has shaped lives, even if you cannot always see it. Know that peace can be found within yourself, in the quiet moments, in the small joys, in the choices you make to honor your own heart. Even in the absence of those we hold dear, life continues. Love remains, hope endures, and we can still find beauty, purpose, and connection in the world around us. I may never hear from some of my children again. I may never feel the warmth of their presence as I once did. But I have learned that life is not diminished by absence. It is enriched by the love we carry, the resilience we embrace, and the quiet strength we find in ourselves. I wait by the window sometimes, and I watch the world pass by. I smile at children playing, at neighbors greeting each other, at the sun breaking through clouds. I feel the pulse of life all around me, and though the phone may remain silent, my heart is not. It beats with a rhythm of love, patience, and quiet dignity. It carries memories, hope, and the knowledge that I have lived a life of devotion, and that is enough. I have learned to live for myself, to love without expectation, and to embrace the beauty that still exists. And in that, I have found a peace that no absence can take away. Even when abandoned, even when left behind, life continues. And so do I.